Every time you pull cash from your wallet, you're holding ghosts. Not heroes, ghosts. The faces staring back at you aren't there because they were great. They're there because they presided over moments when America nearly died. These portraits aren't trophies mounted in a hall of fame. They're scars, battle wounds, memorial markers for the catastrophes that almost ended everything. Your dollar bill is a gravestone, and the men buried on it are the undertakers who barely kept the nation from being lowered into its own tomb. This isn't the history they taught you. This is the visceral, bloody truth about why these specific men ended up immortalized on the currency you touch every single day. Let's start with the face you see most often. George Washington on the $1 bill. The father of his country, right? That's the myth. Here's the reality. Washington got that spot because in December 1776, he watched the entire American experiment collapse in real time. After humiliating defeats in New York, Washington's Continental Army wasn't just losing, it was evaporating. In late 1776, his forces that once numbered nearly 20,000 men had shrunk to just 3,000 freezing, starving souls. Men were deserting in droves. Enlistments were expiring at year's end. The British were hunting them across New Jersey like wounded animals. Thomas Paine captured the desperation perfectly when he wrote those famous words, "These are the times that try men's souls." Try is an understatement. These were the times that nearly extinguished men's souls entirely. Washington stood at the Delaware River on Christmas night, 1776, staring at ice-choked water, knowing that if he didn't do something dramatic in the next 72 hours, there would be no United States of America. Just a failed rebellion and 13 colonies crawling back to King George with their tails between their legs. The crossing of the Delaware wasn't a strategic military maneuver. It was a Hail Mary pass thrown by a quarterback who knew the clock had run out. Washington attacked Trenton in a desperate gamble, won a stunning victory, then did it again at Princeton. Those 10 crucial days saved the Revolution from total annihilation. But here's what they don't tell you in the textbooks. Washington didn't win because he was a brilliant tactician. Multiple historians describe him as sometimes incompetent in battle. He won because he refused to surrender, even when surrender was the only logical choice left. His face is on the dollar because he kept an army together through sheer force of will, when that army had every reason to dissolve. The dollar bill memorializes not his greatness, but America's brush with extinction. That portrait is a scar from the winter the nation almost bled out completely. Now, flip to the $10 bill. Alexander Hamilton, brilliant founding father, first Treasury Secretary, face of American financial genius. That's one way to tell the story. Here's another. Hamilton's face is on that bill because his economic policies nearly triggered the first American Civil War. In 1791, Hamilton pushed through an excise tax on whiskey to pay off the Revolutionary War debt. Seems reasonable, right? Not if you were a Western Pennsylvania farmer in 1794. For these frontier families, whiskey wasn't just a drink. It was currency. It was how they transported grain over the Appalachian Mountains. One horse could carry the equivalent of 24 bushels of rye in whiskey barrels versus only 4 bushels of grain. Hamilton's tax hit them like a sledgehammer to the skull. The response was immediate and violent. Tax collectors were tarred and feathered. Some were beaten, whipped, and left for dead in the wilderness. By July 1794, 400 armed rebels set fire to the home of the regional tax supervisor near Pittsburgh.
This wasn't protest, this was insurrection. America was 7 years old, and it was already at war with itself. The Whiskey Rebellion threatened to split the fragile young nation in half, geographically between East and West, economically between merchants and farmers, culturally between cities and countryside. President Washington, at Hamilton's urging, led 13,000 troops into western Pennsylvania to crush the rebellion. Think about that. Washington had to personally lead an army against American citizens on American soil to enforce a federal tax. The rebellion collapsed, but it exposed a terrifying truth. The federal government's authority was so uncertain that it took the hero of the revolution marching at the head of an army to prove it even existed.
Hamilton's face isn't on currency because he was a financial genius. It's there because he pushed America to the brink of civil war, and it took overwhelming military force to step back from that edge. His portrait commemorates the moment when Americans first raised arms against each other over the power of the federal government. That $10 bill is a memorial to internal violence barely contained. Slide over to the $2 bill, the odd duck of American currency. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, champion of liberty, philosopher-president. Also the man who betrayed every principle he claimed to hold sacred because the alternative was watching America strangle in its cradle. In 1803, Napoleon offered to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States for $15 million. It would double the size of the nation, a bargain of epic proportions. There was just one problem that kept Jefferson awake at night. The Constitution didn't give the President or Congress the power to purchase foreign territory. Jefferson was a strict constructionist. He believed the federal government had only those powers explicitly written in the Constitution. If it wasn't specifically stated, you couldn't do it, period. And nowhere did the Constitution say you could buy land from foreign nations. Jefferson was facing the greatest crisis of conscience in presidential history. He wrote to John Dickinson, "The general government has no powers but such as the Constitution gives it. It has not given it power of holding foreign territory, and still less of incorporating it into the Union. An amendment of the Constitution seems necessary for this." Jefferson drafted a constitutional amendment to legalize the purchase retroactively. But then word arrived that Napoleon might be reconsidering the deal. Jefferson had to choose, follow his sacred constitutional principles, or save America's future. He chose survival over principle. He wrote to his Attorney General, "The less that is said about any constitutional difficulty, the better." In other words, shut up and let's get this done before Napoleon changes his mind. Jefferson pushed the treaty through the Senate in 2 days, violated everything he claimed to believe, and doubled the size of America. His face is on currency because he proved that when the nation's survival was at stake, principles were negotiable. That $2 bill is a monument to hypocrisy that saved the country. Now look at the $20 bill. Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory, man of the people. His face is there because in 1832, he stared down South Carolina when that state threatened to tear the Union apart over tariffs. The nullification crisis was a dress rehearsal for the Civil War, and Jackson played the lead role. South Carolina, led by Jackson's own Vice President, John C. Calhoun, declared federal tariffs null and void within state boundaries. They said if the federal government tried to collect these duties, South Carolina would secede from the Union. They even began preparing military forces.
America was 30 years from the Civil War, but in 1832, disunion was already knocking on the door. Jackson's response was unequivocal. In his nullification proclamation of December 10, 1832, he wrote that South Carolina's actions brought the state to the brink of insurrection and treason. Then he delivered the line that would echo through history: "Disunion by armed force is treason." Jackson prepared to lead federal troops into South Carolina himself. He told his Secretary of War, "We must be prepared to act with promptness and crush the monster in its cradle before it matures to manhood." South Carolina backed down, but only after Congress passed the force bill authorizing military action and a compromise tariff eased tensions. The crisis passed without bloodshed, but it revealed the fault line that would eventually split America apart.
Jackson's face is on the 20 because he held the Union together by threatening to make war on a state. That portrait doesn't celebrate triumph. It marks the first time a president had to choose between preserving the nation or allowing states to pick and choose which laws they'd follow. That $20 bill is a scar from the moment America discovered that unity might require violence. The $5 bill shows Abraham Lincoln, and his story needs no introduction. Everyone knows about the Civil War. But think about what that means. Lincoln is on currency because he presided over the only time in American history when the nation actually did tear itself apart. 600,000 Americans died. The South seceded. Armies of Americans slaughtered each other on American soil. And Lincoln had to decide whether to fight a war to force states back into a union they no longer wanted to be part of. In 1862, after a year of devastating losses, Lincoln faced mutiny from his own generals, a Northern public losing faith, and the very real possibility that European powers would recognize the Confederacy as a legitimate nation. His solution was the Emancipation Proclamation, issued January 1, 1863, which transformed the war from a fight to preserve the Union into a war to end slavery. It was politically genius and morally right, but it was also a desperate gamble. Many in the North didn't want to fight a war to free slaves. Many in the border states that stayed loyal owned slaves themselves. Lincoln risked alienating half his own coalition. The proclamation didn't even free all slaves, only those in Confederate territory. It was a war measure wrapped in moral language, designed to keep Britain and France from recognizing the Confederacy while giving the Union a higher purpose. Lincoln's face is on the $5 bill because the nation literally came apart on his watch, and he had to forge it back together through blood and fire and political maneuvering so masterful that historians still debate whether it was genius or desperation. That $5 bill is a memorial to America's only suicide attempt.
The $50 bill carries Ulysses S. Grant, the general who won that Civil War. But Grant's face isn't there for his military victories. It's there because, as president, from 1869 to 1877, he tried to stop America from returning to the hell it had just escaped. Reconstruction was supposed to be America's redemption arc. The North won, slavery ended, and now the former Confederate states would rejoin the Union with rights for newly freed Black Americans protected. Instead, Reconstruction became a blood-soaked nightmare. The Ku Klux Klan, which historian Fergus Bordewich calls the first organized terrorist movement in American history, rose from the ashes of defeat. At its peak in the early 1870s, the Klan had tens of thousands of members, including landowners, lawmen, doctors,
journalists, and future congressmen. Their mission was simple: obliterate the political power of freed Black Americans through terror. Lynchings, midnight raids, assassinations. Grant responded by using federal troops to crush Klan violence, even declaring martial law in 9 South Carolina counties in 1871. He pushed through the Enforcement Acts and the Ku Klux Klan Act, the first federal civil rights legislation. But the nation's will was breaking. The Panic of 1873 triggered an economic depression that made Northerners lose interest in protecting Black rights in the South. By the mid-1870s, Southern states were being redeemed by white Democrats who systematically stripped away the gains of Reconstruction. Grant's presidency ended with most of the South back under white supremacist control. His efforts to save Reconstruction failed not because he didn't try, but because America didn't have the stomach to finish what the war had started. Grant's face is on the 50 because he presided over America's failure to heal itself. That portrait commemorates the moment when the nation chose reconciliation with white Southerners over justice for Black Americans. That $50 bill is a gravestone for a dream that died. Finally, the $100 bill. Benjamin Franklin, the only non-president on modern American currency. Why? Because in 1787, Franklin was the glue holding together a constitutional convention that was seconds away from exploding. The convention had been deadlocked for weeks over representation in Congress. Large states wanted population-based representation. Small states wanted equal representation. Neither would budge. Tempers were flaring. Delegates were threatening to walk out. On June 28, 1787, Franklin stood up and proposed something radical: prayer. He called for the convention to open each day with prayer, because mankind may hereafter from this unfortunate instance despair of establishing governments by human wisdom. Even that motion failed, with some delegates pointing out they didn't have money to pay a chaplain. But Franklin's real contribution came through backroom compromise. He helped broker the Great Compromise: proportional representation in the House, equal representation in the Senate. Without Franklin's influence, the convention might have collapsed with nothing to show for it. Then, on September 17th, the last day, 3 delegates refused to sign the finished Constitution. Franklin gave a speech written by himself but read by James Wilson because Franklin was 81 and too weak to deliver it himself. He admitted the Constitution had flaws, but urged everyone to sign it anyway because no other convention could do better. He told them to doubt a little of his own infallibility. Even then, those 3 delegates still refused, but enough others were persuaded that the Constitution was signed. Franklin's face is on the $100 bill because he prevented the Constitutional Convention from failing. That portrait doesn't honor genius. It honors the old man who talked younger men down from destroying the last chance to create a functioning American government. That $100 bill is a monument to how close America came to never having a constitution at all. So here's the dark truth they don't teach in schools. These faces on your currency aren't there because these men were great, though some were. They're there because each of them stood at the edge of an abyss, and America was teetering on the rim. Washington, when the Revolution was dying. Hamilton, when the nation nearly tore itself apart over taxes. Jackson, when South Carolina threatened secession. Lincoln, when the nation actually did secede. Grant, when the peace was bloodier than the war. Franklin when the Constitution almost died in its cradle. Your money is a memorial. Every bill is a gravestone marking another moment when the American experiment flatlined and someone managed to shock it back to life. These portraits aren't celebrations, they're scars. And every time you spend $1, you're touching the tissue of an old wound that never fully healed. That's the real reason these faces ended up on American currency. Not because they were the best, because they were there when it was worst. And somehow, against all odds, they kept the patient breathing. Your wallet doesn't hold history, it holds trauma. And those faces staring back at you are the ghosts of every time America almost died.